Join our pack. Subscribe to start your adventure. Chapter 18. I sat in the pack hospital on the patient bed with a thin patient robe on. They had to give me fluids and some food in my system, along with some other doctorate things. Even though I was in pretty bad shape, all I could think about was Iris and if she was awake. If she was feeling better. Her room was right next to mine. Mason has been switching back and forth between rooms to keep an eye on us both. Right now he was going to get a coffee for himself. We had been here for about 6 hours with all the testing and fluids and other things. I didn't care. I wanted Aaron and Iris in my arms. Aaron wasn't allowed in my room until I was tested for everything. I understood, but I still just wanted him with me now. I laid back and Mason stood up, looking down at me. He smiled a small, crooked smile and put his hand on the nape of my neck, rubbing slowly. She's going to be all right, he soothed. And what if she isn't? She got out of the car to protect me. I should have protected them, not the other way around. If anything happens to her, I couldn't say anymore. I covered my eyes and cried into my hands. Mason lifted me into a sitting position and held me for what seemed like hours until my room door opened. I didn't look up until Mason and I were addressed. I didn't want to look up, yes. Mason answered. We have Iris's results back from the lab. The doctor told us. I was at attention now and listening closely. End, I pressed. The doctor looked down at her clipboard and I clenched Mason's hand tighter. Iris was weakened by the silver chains just like you, Luna. But because of her age and maturity for a wolf, it had a greater effect. She has gotten silver poisoning from the chains that were on her wrists through the duration of your capture. I stopped listening when I heard the word say silver poisoning. That was almost the equivalent of cancer in the werewolf world. Except it's not like a switch that's turned on like cancer, and like count survival rate, but not by much. There is a cure with a success rate of 75 tears seeped from my eyes and blurred my vision. She would be in the hospital for months and, if she did come out alive, her body would not be as strong as possible as she grows. They know immediately when silver poisoning is in a wolf because when the blood is put under a microscope, molecule-sized pieces of silver are seen in the blood. Many cases aren't even discovered because of how small the silver particles in the blood are. She wouldn't be awake yet and I knew that now she would be in pain, even as she slept. Her bones would ache and her veins would feel too warm but she could do nothing about it. As if she were in a coma. I guess you could call it that. I covered my face and sobbed hysterically into my hands. Mason pulled me to his chest and tried to soothe me, but all I could do was push and hit him. I didn't know why I did it. It wasn't his fault. I didn't know how else to react. The doctor said, your test results came back clean, so you are free to go and see your pups and anyone else you like. Once that ID bag is empty, just ring the bell and someone will give you your discharge papers. We will do everything we can for Iris. The doctor left the room. I lifted myself out of my bed with Mason's help and refused the wheelchair he offered with a death glare. I was weak and quite small, but I was not disabled. I entered Iris's room and more tears brimmed my eyes. Her wrists were purple with a silver tint. Under her eyes was purple and her fingernails seemed like they were deteriorating when my fingers skimmed them. She was pale. So pale. Too pale. I didn't want to touch her too much because I knew it may cause her pain and she wouldn't be able to tell me to stop. I had caused her enough pain. I didn't want to cause more. I love you. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I whispered to her. I hoped she would connect with me through the mind link. I tried, but she must have been too weak. Nothing came through. Mason moved her hair out of her face and looked closely at her. She was his little girl now. We were family. And if we were to lose her, I have no idea what we would do. Get better, Squirt. Don't leave us. I heard Mason whisper. I kissed her hand softly and wiped my tears. I leaned against Mason and kissed his shoulder, before relaxing against him. We left the hospital after a few hours of sitting in silence. I'm not sure what Mason was thinking, but I had a blank mind, waiting for Iris to wake up. We arrived home and I looked at the big white house. I should have felt joy, but how could I when my pup was laying unconscious in a hospital bed? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I heard a little voice scream. I smiled for the first time in a long time and kneel, opening my arms for Aaron to jump into. I gave him the biggest hug I could manage and cried silently, holding him and rocking us slowly on the floor. Where's Iris? A new bunch of tears swam down my cheeks and I sniffled. I pulled away from the hug reluctantly and told him about Iris. How brave she was and how she stuck it out. Then I told him about her silver poisoning. His little eyes wide and I saw the tears brim his eyes. Mason put his hand out for us to stand and we all hugged tightly. Aaron cried, clutching Mason's shirt, and I stroked his hair, crying as well. She's gonna make it, buddy. She's strong. You know that, Mason told Aaron. Chapter 19. That night, I stood outside on the balcony that is connected to Mason and I's bedroom. Mason and lay sleeping in our large bed. My worries kept me from blissful slumber, not to mention the nightmares. Nightmares of what did, could have, and may happen to Iris. I looked up at the moon and sighed, my breathe fog in the cold air. I called to my wolf, meeting her just at the surface to connect with the moon goddess. In human nails, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And Eve came out, but I stopped my wolf there. I breathed in the cold night air and exhaled slowly, repeating a few times. Once my negative thoughts were gone, I began speaking to the moon goddess. Please, please, I beg of you, don't take her from me. Not like this. Not at all, please. She is not supposed to die first. Please, they are all I have left. Let me be there for them. And then for me, you gave me a mate. You gave me a piece of my pack back. I'll give it all back if it means she lives. I'll give it all back to you. Don't take her. Don't. I was beginning to fall into hysteria at just the thought of losing her, and I felt arms wrap around me. I recognized the scent as Mason. He pulled me away from the balcony and shut the doors to it, setting me on the love seat in our room. I shook as I cried so much, and he held me, stroking my hair. I looked at him and saw tear brim his beautiful eyes. I put my hand to his cheek and kissed his cheek. How old are you? I whispered. London. I don't want to, I cut him off. Please. The second day of meeting, I found out you were destined alpha. You have never told me a thing about that. I would much rather talk about this and distract myself from other things. I pleaded. He looked at me for a few long moments and sighed. He nodded and I turned around so I could lean my back against him. He draped his large arm over my shoulder, and I kissed his forearm. What do you want to know? How old are you? I asked him. 107, he answered. I nodded and looked over when Aaron started to mumble, but he was still sleeping. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Have you always had this pack or have you had multiple? Just this one. I inherited it from my father, and many of the pack members are 3rd to 4th generation werewolves of this pack. Where is your father now? I asked him. He was quiet for a long moment, and just as I was about to turn to look at him, I killed him 70 years ago, 20 years after he murdered my mother. He said, and I tried to sit up, but he wouldn't let me. Please don't. Just let me talk. I nodded. My father was abusive to all his children and my mother. I was his most hated child, though he always said I was a failure and he regretted the day I was conceived. He blamed my mother for giving birth to a failure. One day when my father was coming after me with a broken bottle, my mother stepped in. She tried to stop him and my eyes followed the bottle as it smashed against the wall. At that very second I heard my mother scream. My father had pushed her down the 40 stairs in the old pack house. I had never seen so much blood in my life. He paused. I rubbed his arm, letting him know I was here for him. He took a deep breath. My siblings were away at the time with other family members. They returned as soon as they heard. He made me play into the story that my mother's death was a complete accident. I was only a teen back then, but I knew what really happened. I was just too scared of him to come out and say it. Years later, my father remarried. He was kinder to his new wife, but not by much. I kept a watchful eye on his new wife as much as I could, but she came up missing. I knew it was my father, but he played the strong alpha role. I confronted him, telling him I knew what really happened. I told him I would expose him for what he did to my mother. He started to shake and I snuggled into him more, reminding him I was here. He said the only way I would be able to expose him would be if I were alive. We both shifted in the woods where we were speaking. He said he had been waiting for this for too long and he lunged. He was out for blood, but so was I. I sliced his throat and stayed until he took his last breath. I was almost put up for execution, but my mother convinced the moon goddess to help me. The goddess showed them all what really happened to my mother. I still do not know what happened to my father's second wife. She was never found. He finished. I sat up and turned toward him, hugging him tightly. He sighed shakily and I kissed him gently. I felt for so many years I would turn into my father after my first kill being my own blood. He admitted. I shook my head no. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. No, you are not your father. Do you hear me? Your father was a murderer and he would have murdered you too if you had not defended yourself. I told him firmly. His eyes were red with sorrow as he looked at me and my heart bled for him. I hugged him tightly and he hugged me back. I pulled away and his eyes began to go back to normal as he stopped thinking about such tragic things. I love you. I smiled at him. I love you as well. His voice so deep it sent shivers down my back. I leaned against him again, stroking his arm with my fingers. For a moment, we were Aunt Alpha and soon to be Luna. We did not have a pup in the hospital. We did not have tragic past swaying us down. For a moment, we were just together and in love. Normal people. In that moment, I finally knew what it was to feel bliss. Chapter 22 weeks later. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling of our bedroom. Mason was close to me, his breath filling my neck. Aaron was snuggled into my side, snorting every once in a while from his violent snores. I would have gotten up by now, but between Mason's arm across my waist and not wanting to leave them, I had no chance. The landline next to our bed rang and I had to fight Mason's large sleeping from just to reach over him and grab it. He growled in his sleep and I rolled my eyes, my boobs in his face as I grasped the phone. I saw it was the hospital and sat upright in a haste. Both the boys woke and spun around, looking for what was wrong. I paid no mind to them, answered the phone. Hello? Hello? Luna? This is Dr. Masters. I was calling in regard to Iris. She is now stable and should be waking up shortly. I wanted to inform you so you would be here. I would like to speak to both of you once you get here. The doctor told me. Tears ran down my cheeks as I grinned. Mason smiled and kissed my shoulder, hearing the whole conversation. Aaron looked between the two of us, wondering what was up. I was speechless. I was elated. Mason took the phone and told the doctor we would be to the hospital after breakfast. I covered my face with my hands and cried laughed into them. I leapt out of the bed and changed into clothes for the day. I threw a pair of jeans and a shirt at Mason and got Aaron up. He rubbed his eyes and walked with me to his room. Is Iris awake? She will be soon. Honey, can you get ready so we can have breakfast, please? I kissed his head and laid out an outfit for him. The three of us had breakfast and rushed off to see Iris. By the time we got there, her eyes were open and she smiled weakly at us. I rushed to her side and moved her hair from her face. "Come on," she whispered. My heart swelled and I nodded. Tears spray. "Hi, honey." Sitting Aaron in my lap. Mason sat on the opposite side of her bed and smiled at her. "Hi," she whispered, her finger twitching toward his hand. He wrapped his finger around hers and she winced. Mason tried to pull away but she held on tighter, wincing again. "Don't let go," she whispered. "Not for a moment. Never again." I grinned as she looked at Aaron. She smiled and Aaron waved, smiling at her. She giggled and winced once again. I looked down as Aaron put his hand next to hers and saw she tried to move her finger. Her hands and wrist flexed, showing that her veins were still silver. Before I could think about what that could mean, there was a knock at the door. Dr. Masters smiled and entered the room. "Good morning. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "Luna. And good morning, Iris. I hope you're feeling better." "Hello. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "Could I possible the two of you in my office?" Looking at Mason and myself. We nodded and I set Aaron in my seat. I softly closed Iris's door as I left. I looked at the two of them talking and smiled before taking Mason's hand, following the doctor down the hall. "She seems much better," Mason said gratefully. "She's except for some things," she said sadly. "What things?" "Worry. Something happened with Iris during recovery. Her body healed marvelously, most likely due to her alpha bloodlines. But there is still a portion of the poison in her left arm. This is preventing her from making a full recovery. At this rate, with her arm not foreseeing recovery, she would only gain 65% of her strength back. That percent, as you know, is not enough for her to connect with her wolf. Her wolf is not present and will never be if this persists," she explained. My jaw must have been on the floor at this new information. Was she saying? "So what does that mean?" "I mean what? What has to? What do you?" Mason stuttered for words, knowing deep down exactly what it meant. In order for Iris to have full recovery and strength and come back in contact with her wolf, we would have to amputate Iris's arm from the elbow down. The air in my lungs seemed like it was pushed out in one huge, violent shove. I put my face in my hands and felt tears drop into my palms. God, this was all my fault. "Dr. Masters, is there anything else that could possibly be done?" I begged. She sighed and shook her head in defeat. "I've mulled over this since I found out 5 days ago. I ran countless tests. The only other option is to let Iris go on with such a danger in her arm. She would have to live as a sick human if we don't amputate," she said solemnly. I had no words and all I could do was sit back in my chair and think over everything that would happen. "I just have to know what the two of you want done," she said softly. "It's not our choice," I said suddenly. Mason took my hand and looked at me with grave eyes. "It's not our choice. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "We can't just decide this for her. She's not a little kid. She understands. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nelban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "I can give you a while to talk it over with Iris," she suggested. I nodded. We all exited her office and Mason was quiet. "You didn't say much in there," I said to him. I didn't really know what to say. He said weakly, "What do you think she'll say?" I asked quietly. "Either way she chooses to go. She loses. We lose. She is basically human with it, and without it she is a weak she-wolf. She will hate both options. As do I." I nod. I take his hand and kiss his cheek, pulling him into a hug. I breath in his scent and sigh. I had no idea how we were going to do this. Chapter 21. Mason and I entered Iris's room to see Annie and Jason sitting on either side of her bed. She was smiling as she talked to them. "Jason has been here a few days ago, but Manny has been away for a few weeks." I was surprised to see him. He stood and Mason pulled him into a hug. The two brothers looked like the tree trunks slamming together and I smiled. Manny hugged me as well and kissed my head. Jason gave us hugs as well, and we walked them out. We filled them in and they were quiet as we stood in the hall. So she loses either way. Manny concludes. We nodded. "She's strong, guys." "I bet she'll be stronger than most in the pack even without it," Jason said honestly. Mason smiled and nodded. "Oh, and Mason. There are some issues that need to be dealt with as soon as possible." "Well, I'll tell you about it later," Manny stuttered. My brows drew together as the two had a private conversation in their minds. Jason looked at me, knowing what was happening but wouldn't say a word. Mace and Ogden and I was worried he would break his teeth. He looked at me and smiled softly. Manny and Jason left a while later and we entered Iris's room. She looked at us with solemn eyes. "I heard everything," she sniffled, her eyes full of tears. I took her hand and had to hold back tears of my own. Mace unkissed her head and stroked her cheek with his thumb, catching a fallen tear. She whispered to him. Both mine and Mason's eyebrows drew together at her statement. "Sorry for what, sweetie?" I asked her. "I'm sorry I won't be strong like Mom and I won't be the strong alpha daughter that my real father and that Mason would expect," she whispered before bringing her good arm up to cover her face with her hand as she sobbed. My heart broke right then. I was about to speak but Mason beat me to it. "To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "Look at me," he demanded softly. She shook her head. "To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." She sighed and slowly brought her eyes to meet his. He took her hand and his eyes changed to his wolf. He stared into her eyes until finally her eyes changed to her wolf's as well. "You are an alpha's daughter, no matter what, whether you are the strongest of the pack or not. You are an alpha's daughter and a damn good alpha's daughter at that. Do you understand, Alice? To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Mason's wolf, told Alice. Iris's wolf. Yes, I understand. I feel like a terrible wolf. I was born to be the strongest. Now I'll die as the weakest. Alice whimpered. Maurice huffed disapprovingly. You are only as weak as you allow yourself to be. A fool will think strength only lays in the body. A warrior will know strength also comes from the heart, Maurice told her. My heart swelled and my wolf pranced happily for having found such a great mate. I decided to let her say something as well. I sat back and let her show herself. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My wolf. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Alice looked at me and smiled softly. Your father was the greatest alpha I know. And I know you and Aaron work even the biggest, strongest hearts of any wolf. The strength in your arms, yes, any of your body cannot compare even at full strength. That's what makes you a fantastic and strong she-wolf, Marian told her honestly. All at once, we all took back control from our wolves and smiled at each other. We went in for a group hug and Iris took a deep breath. Okay, I'm ready. I want the operation, she said confidently. You're sure? Mason terrified. She did not hesitate for a moment. Yes. I wouldn't want to lose my wolf and risk the disease spreading. I want to do it, she told us. I smiled softly at her and nodded, kissing her head. I'll inform drive. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I told her and exited hospital room. After informing the doctor Iris's decision, she said Iris would begin prepping for surgery tomorrow morning. I let out a shaky breath and sat up Iris's room to gather my thoughts. I put my face in my hands and massaged my scalp. I heard someone sit next to me and chuckled as Manny gave me a goofy smile. Jason sat on the other side of me on the cold floor. I thought you guys left. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Well, we did, but we wanted to come back and make sure everything was still okay. Plus, you have more visitors, Jason pointed. I looked and saw Beatrice with her daughter and many other pack members. I smiled and Aaron ran over, hugging me. I hugged Beatrice and as many people as I could. How is she? Everyone asked. She's going to be all right. We just have one more hurdle to jump, but she can do it. She's very strong, I informed them. They all hooted and hollered, cheering gratefully. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. You can take turns saying some things to Iris, if you'd like. She's in room 113. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. People walked past me to take turns in Iris's room and Mason hugged Beatrice. Mindy and Aaron walked away to sit on the bench together, and a couple other kids followed and sat beside them and started playing a game. We chatted with pack members and informed everyone that visiting hours were over. Everyone said their goodbyes, and once everyone was gone, including Aaron to Mindy's house with other friends, Mason and I went to say goodbye to Iris. We'll be here early in the morning so we can talk before the surgery and keep you company. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Mason told her. She nodded, smiling at us. Thank you, she said gratefully. Good night. I love you. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Love you, kid, Mason said, squeezing her good hand gently. Love you guys too. Good night, she said, and we took our leave. I have an idea for what we can do when we get home. I smirked at Mason, feeling actually pretty normal and peaceful since being taken. Oh really? His hand landed on my butt with a hard smack as we made our way to the car in the parking lot. Chapter 22. A week later, Iris has gone through her surgery like a champ. They had done a great job, and with the arm gone, her healing abilities were back to full strength. She healed in only a week's time. I was so glad to have everyone back together, but then Mason began acting strange. On edge most of the time. I could not put my finger on it. I wondered if it was that I was going to be crowned Luna in 2 weeks, but dismissed the thought. He was excited, not nervous for that. Even when we made love, it seemed like his mind was partly somewhere else, and I've been dodging doing it again until I figure out what's going on. I served the kids their breakfast and kissed each of their heads. They would be starting school soon and they were elated. They would each be starting a couple grades behind, which they were a tad embarrassed about. I told them there was nothing to worry about. Everyone loves them and they will make friends their own age too. Mason never came down for breakfast and I sighed, putting the dishes in the sink. I walked up to his office and knocked. Before entering, "You weren't at breakfast," I concluded. "I'm sorry, I was trying to figure something out," he replied, not looking up from his desk. I sighed and stomped over to his desk and sat on the papers he was working on. He looked up in surprise and his 5 o'clock shadow was evident. "What is up with you? You're never around us, and even when you are, your head is somewhere else. We're a family. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "You want to tell me what's up yet?" He sighed and put his palm on my leg, rubbing soothing circles. I folded my arms across my chest. "We think the men who captured you and Iris had more men that knew about what they were doing. We have had a few sightings of men with snake and scorpion tartars at night. I'm about to put a curfew on the pack tonight. We think they're back to finish the job and take some other lives in their way," Mason explained. I didn't really react at first and my brows furrowed. "And you didn't tell me, because I trailed off, waiting for him to answer. "I didn't want you to worry. You have enough on your plate," patting my leg. My lips pressed into a thin line and my nostrils flared. I stood up and walked around the other side of his desk. "I have the same amount of things on my plate as you do on yours. Honestly, to my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You can't just keep things from me and expect that to come off as protecting me. I'm about to be your Luna, and if this is how you're going to include me, then maybe I want no part of this." Before turning to storm out, I hand-caught my arm before I could leave, however, and Mason spun me around to face him. His lips connected with mine. I moaned softly as he wrapped his arms around my waist and mine around his neck. I pulled away and glared slightly. "And that's another thing. Whenever we have sex, you God, shut up and let me kiss you. London," kissing me passionately. He picked me up and carried me to his desk where he set me down and starting fiddling with the button of my jeans. I undid his belt as he began to kiss and nip at my neck. I sighed and moaned slightly as his teeth grazed over his mark on my neck. He whispered. I nodded and crashed our lips together again. Just as I had gotten Mason's pounce, and a shrill scream of terror came from outside. Mason and I were up and out, clothed, fixed in seconds. We ran down the stairs and past the kids who were in the living room, looking confused. "Stay here with your brother," I told Iris. We ran out into the middle of the pack village to see Lucinda holding Beatrice to her chest as she screamed and cried. I ran to the scene, Mason slightly ahead of me. Den Audie lay bloodied and lifeless on the ground a little way from the start of the forest. Beatrice was in hysteria and Manny was trying to revive Den Audie. Troy E came to observe what was happening and his eyes changed immediately upon seeing her. He roared louder than even Mason did sometimes, and many covered their ears. You killed my baby," Beatrice screamed, trying to attack Troy. I ran over to the argument and tugged Beatrice back. "You honestly think I would kill my own Nate? You crazy old bat. She was 2 months pregnant." Bea screamed and hit him, scratching him with one of her nails as her wolf began to come through. Beatrice calmed down. I pleaded, holding her back. "No," she screamed. "Beatrice, stop." I shouted in a voice that was not my own. Her movements immediately stopped and she sank to the ground, sobbing. I looked over to see Manny still trying to revive Den Audie, and Mason stopped him, shaking his head. They stood, both covered in blood, and Jason came tumbling out of the woods. Nothing. Not even a scent. They must have been here just as night broke for their scent to be gone. he informed. Mason looked around at all the scared pack members and I soothed Beatrice. From here on out, there will be a curfew set for before dark. That is 800. If you must be out later, then you will mind link myself. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Or Manny or your Una. And walk with someone at all times. Any sightings of outsiders are to be reported immediately. He announced in his alpha voice. Yes, Alpha. Everyone said all at once. Everyone go home. Manny said. Everyone dispersed and I helped Beatrice up as Troy tried to run to Denori. Manny held him back and shook his head. You don't want to see her like this. Troy. Go home. Manny whispered to him, but we all heard. His shoulders sagged and he slowly retreated home, tears streaming down his cheeks. He turned toward me before he went. I know I wasn't the best mate and I was an asshole. But I did love your daughter and we were working on my issues. We were getting better. He whimpered, before walking away. Chapter 23. I led Beatrice into the house and set her down at the ironing counter in the kitchen. Her hands were shaking as she took the cup of tea I made her. Lucinda sat on the opposite side of the counter next to Manny. Mason and I sat at the ends of the island. She sniffled as Mindy and Aaron ran to his room to play with his toys. Beatrice hadn't told Mindy yet. She said she was going to be crushed. Even though she was young, she remembered the fun times before Den Audie was mated, and she loved her big sister and kept waiting for her to come home. What's happening? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Be asked quietly. He sighed and I moved next to her, taking her hand. She seemed to visibly relax from the touch of her Luna. We're going to get who did this to her. Beatrice. Mason promised. She nodded and covered her mouth, starting to sob again. I rubbed soothing circles on her hand and we all sat quietly. Mindy stayed at our house that night so Beatrice could have some time alone. I put all the kids to bed and went to the bathroom to freshen up before bed. I dug in my bag for my makeup wipes and came across a brand new box of tampons. My brows furrowed slightly and I took them out. I checked the calendar in the bathroom and realized I was 6 days late for my period. My eyes widened and I sat on the counter, biting on my nails. Did we? I sighed shakily and thought about it for a while. A knock on the door shook my thoughts away. Hey babe, you all right in there? Mason asked from the other side of the door. Yo, I'm fine. I'll be out in a second. I called back. I put everything away and removed my makeup before exiting the bathroom. Mason was scrolling on something on his phone and turned his gaze to me. He smiled slightly, but it wasn't a happy smile. I slid into bed next to him and kissed his cheek before laying down. I woke the next morning to an empty hand. Reading the note that Mason had all of the kids while he was in town. I tapped my fingers on the counter and looked at the calendar again. Period 6 days late. 3 days away from being crowned Luna. Goddess. The doorbell rang and my brows furrowed slightly, wondering who could possibly be there. I opened the door and peeked out the small inch of open doorway. To my surprise, Troy stood outside the door. I sighed and opened the door wide enough and stepped out of the house. Hello, Troy. I said blandly. Hello, London, he replied in a small voice. It is Luna. I told him curtly. I understood that he had lost his mate and his unborn child. But at the same time, he did not think enough to care this much while she was alive. I will fight but as much making up to do for disrespecting his mate, not to mention the goddess herself. I know what you must think of me. I think of myself the same. I should have treated her right. But if I do not. I was cruel and slept with another. He sniffled, choking on his words. My eyes narrowed, Why did you come here? Troy, I asked him. I've never experienced it. I don't know if it's true, but your touch, a Luna's touch, can soothe bad emotions. Ethne for a moment. I know you're not a full Luna yet, but I read you can still do it, just not as intense. He replied. I raised my brow, wrapping my blanket tighter around my shoulders. Please, Luna. Please, just take the pain for at least a moment. Sobbing. My heart going out to him slightly, I bit my lip and inched my hand toward his chest. I had never really intentionally won this. I felt on the spot at that moment. My hand rested over his heart and he sighed, hiccuping slightly. He calmed as I kept my hand in place. Thank you. Tears coming back. I nodded gently. He socked away back the way he came and my heart aches for him. I couldn't imagine losing Mason, or an unborn child. I looked down at my own belly and smiled slightly, closing the door behind me. I sat down on the couch, but as soon as I did, the doorbell rang once more. For the love of Pete. I groaned. I went to the door and swung it open, slightly irritated. Dark brown locks of hair swished as the person turned excitedly. I was even more surprised when I saw that the person was Giselle. She was not pleased to see me, however, as her mouth set in a thin line. Oh, Luna. I was expecting Alpha Mason. Her lip quirking in slight disgust. He's out at the moment. Giselle, I thought you were still in Canada. I said, bored. Oh, yeah. It was a drag. I got back the day before yesterday. When will Alpha Mason be back? She moved to entire our home, but I blocked her way and stepped outside, closing the door behind me. So I assume you've heard about what's been happening lately. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Her eyes narrowed slightly and I saw her swallow. Yes, of course. Luna, I also heard about your... To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I mean, that must have been awful. And what happened to Ira? It would be so hard to run a pack after that. Feigning concern. Maybe for some. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Eyeing her up and down. Her jaw upped and she stuffed her hands in her pockets. Not pleased. And her name is Iris. I added. She flicked her hair over her shoulder and cleared her throat. I didn't miss the roll of her eyes. Yeah. Please tell Alpha Mason I have returned and was here. Pulling out her phone, looking determined as she typed away. She began to walk away, and I tilted my head slightly. Giselle, you may want to be careful walking alone. There's way too much that could happen right now. I called after her. She stopped, turning slightly toward me. She gave me a smile. I'm not too worried, she said calmly. My jaw upped and I went back in the house. Piece of work, that one is. I jumped slightly, turning to see Lucinda standing with her arms crossed. Goddess, you scared the shit out of me. I grumbled. My apologies, sis. Honestly, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You played that well, she told me. I wasn't playing anything. Sitting on the couch, she sat next to me as I turned on a movie. Whatever you say. She replied. I studied her for a moment and she caught me looking at her. She raised her brow and I shrugged. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I don't know. You're not like Mason. I admitted. Well, I also haven't had to do what Mason had to do. Haven't seen half of what he's seen. Neither has Manny, she answered. I nodded. Lucinda and got to know each other for the rest of the afternoon, and I had to say that I had taken a liking to her. She was fun and I laughed a lot. She ate with Mason. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobin, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And myself at night. The kids took a liking to her as well. It was a fun night. Manny and Caitlin came as well. I excused myself to the bathroom and sighed, finding one last pregnancy test in a nearly empty box. I decided on taking it. I sighed and put the test away for now, deciding not to think about it and just avoid the wine going around at dinner, just in case. Chapter 24. I sat with Iris on her bed. She had had a night terror. Erin was fast asleep in the next room and I sighed, rubbing her shoulder. My fingers would graze the stop of her amputated arm every once in a while, causing my heart to ache. I rocked her back and forth as she sobbed and slowly began to quiet down. "Mom," she said, "Do you think my mate will reject me once he sees me? You know, without my arm." I sighed and kissed her head. "I don't think so. Even if he did, I think the moon goddess would have another plan for you," I whispered truthfully. She sighed and laid down once again. "Are you nervous to be crowned tomorrow night?" She questioned. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobin, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. But at the same time, no, because I know that this is what I want. I told her. She smiled and I kissed her head. "Call me if you need me." To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobin, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I stepped out of her room and sighed, looking down the hall at my own. I ran a hand over my slightly swollen belly and smiled. I was so nervous to tell Mason, even though I knew he would be ecstatic. I decided to go downstairs and stand on the back porch for some air. The fresh air was heavenly after a long day of fitting my dress, picking decorations, all that jazz. I think Mason was more tolerant than me. However, he wasn't being prodded by needles while being fitted for a dress. The two women working on the dress noticed my belly immediately and I told them to keep quiet. They promised. As I thought about tomorrow night, a small shiny light started to twinkle in the woods. My eyes narrowed slightly and a giggle came from the woods. It sounded like a little girl's giggle. "Come, come," I heard another voice in the woods. I swallowed hard and inched toward the forest. The gentle giggle came again, and I took a deep breath. My mommy will be mad that I snuck out. The little girl said. I didn't recognize the voice all that well, and my heart pounded as I kept my eye on the small shiny object. "Don't worry about that. Come with us. We'll have fun," a voice said. "Okay, let's go," she said excitedly. I gasped, running into the woods to stop her from going no. Ready to grab the girl, but when I got to where the shiny object was, there was no little girl. Giselle stood in the moonlight with a smirk, holding a necklace. The moonlight shining on the necklace, causing the shining that I saw. My eyes narrowed and I straightened. That was easy to the point of boring. "Honestly, you're pathetic," she sighed, tossing the necklace to the side. "Where is she? Where's the little girl?" I demanded, afraid she had hurt her. "You mean this little girl?" She smirked before changing her voice to sound like a young child as she giggled. My eye narrowed even more. "What do you want?" I asked her. "I want what's mine." "I want Alpha Mason," she snarled. I shook my head. "He's not yours, Giselle. He's mine. That's the way it was made to be, and that's the way it will stay. Not if I have anything to do with it. I expected you to be out of the picture by the time I got back. But I guess my idiotic cousins were too dense to take on a weak she-wolf and her pup." She scoffed. "You did that. You sent them after us." Boy, you catch on fast. They were more than happy to do it. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Considering how they had wiped out the rest of your pack, they were pretty pissed to figure out that you were still alive. Small world, huh? She snickered, walking in a large circle around me. Your cousins. That makes you a hybrid. I concluded calmly. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. At least you're smart. That's one thing you have. I mean, honestly, I'm what Mason needs. Strong, unique, basically indestructible. What are you in comparison? She growled. Her unnatural speed whooped my hair forward as she ran up behind me and put her lips to my ear. You're nothing compared to me, she whispered. My teeth and nails grew and I reared my foot back, making Giselle fly back into a tree. She groaned. Your blood killed mine. Your blood killed my pack. Your blood damn near killed my pup. Now I'm going to kill you, I promised her as she stood up. I heard twigs snap behind me and saw 5 demons emerge from the woods. She hissed the way only a demon could. They all stopped. She's mine, she told them. She ran at me and threw her fist at me, which I caught and spun her onto her back. I got on top of her and started to punch her and sunk my nails into her cheek, missing her neck. She let out a demonic scream and shoved me so that I flew off her. I caught myself on a tree and waited for her to climb it. She climbed toward me and I let my wolf take over, grabbing her by the hair and flipping her 10 feet back onto the ground. She landed on her feet and I jumped on her shoulders, pressing my nails into her chest. She screeched, trying to throw me off. I hand-grabbed my shirt and threw me across the clearing in the forest we had got to. My head smacked against the ground and I shook the pain off. I told you not to fucking help. She screamed like a tyrant. I looked up to see her stab him with an odd-looking stake, covered in glowing jewels and black metal. Achines, I realized. One of the only things besides sunlight to kill a demon. The demon screamed briefly before turning to ash. I rolled into taller grass and waited for her to come after me. London. Come out, you dirty little rogue, she sneered. She put the stake in a pouch on her and I grabbed a large rock that lay next to me. She got close enough that I grabbed her foot and yanked as she fell on her back. I lunged forward and smashed the rock into her head. She was stunned and shrieked. I tipped the pouch from her hip and stood up, taking it out. She stood up quickly, feeling for the pouch until she saw me holding the dagger. She began to shake and her skin began to sizzle, which is when I knew I was about to see a very ugly demon she-wolf hybrid. She was about to run toward me when we all heard growls and snarls from outside the clearing. 3 wolves came from one side of the forest, and 5 more from the other side. I could pick out Masons but not who the others were. While Giselle was distracted, I kicked her to the ground and brought the dagger down but missed as she jerked to the side. The dagger stabbed into the soil, and she kicked me away from her. She grabbed the dagger and stood up straight. I kicked at her but she grabbed my ankle and threw me once more. I breathed heavily, looking down at my stomach once. I had not landed on it once. Giselle saw where I was looking and saw the slight bulge of my stomach. Her eyes blazed an ugly yellow-red, and she screamed loud enough that everyone stopped. To my agent extraordinaire, Lycan Love, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She screamed. She ran at me and I jumped up and then over Giselle. She turned around, furious, and swung the dagger at me. I kicked the dagger out of her hand enough that I sent her flying half the length of the large clearing. I shifted right then and noticed the fight between the wolves and demons was over. The last demon was just going down. Mason turned toward us as Giselle recovered and shifted. We ran at each other and both leapt into the air, just about to collide, teeth at the ready. But suddenly, Giselle collapsed with a large yelp. I landed, unharmed, and turned around to see Beatrice had gotten the dagger and in human form, plunged the dagger into Giselle's side. Beatrice looked up as Giselle involuntarily shifted back to human form. I panted, shifting as well as everyone else. Mommy's little girl was avenged, unimpressed. Giselle cackled, blood coming out her mouth. The poison of the dagger not quite reaching her half-demon heart. You killed Denori, Beatrice said through clenched teeth. I've killed lots of people. She smirked. She trusted you. She told you about her unborn pup. Bea exclaimed. She has what I wanted. She had Troy. She had his pup. He promised me those things. I slept with him a year ago and he said he would come back and give me those things. He never did. I would have discarded him anyway. I always wanted you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She sighed, waiting for him. I stepped on her wrist and she groaned. She sighed shakily and shook her head. You're weak. She told me. No, Giselle. I shook my head. I'm a Luna, and you're as good as dead. I whispered in her ear. Her jaw upped and a terror escaped her as she let out her last breath. I sighed and looked around at everyone who was here. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Manny, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Lucinda, Stacy, Troy, and another wolf that stood back. My mouth dropped as I saw the three-legged wolf standing sheepishly behind the small crowd of people. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You brought her here, I exclaimed, standing and running over to her. She whined as I lifted her large legs and paws, observing her for wounds. No, I told her to stay with her and she followed us here. I didn't even realize she was here until the fight was almost over. Mason growled. Shift. Right now, I exclaimed. She whined and did as she was told. She stood shyly and refused to meet my eye. What the hell were you thinking? Where is Aaron? Do you know what could have happened to you? I yelled, afraid as I hugged her tight. I called away. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. But it turned to confusion as I saw her grinning. Mom, it's okay. Aaron is without Caitlin. I did it. But I fought like a normal wolf. It was like I wasn't even missing a limb. She sniffled, overjoyed. Oh my goddess. You couldn't have just gone to pack training on a different day. I groaned, hugging her again. She laughed and hugged me tight with her arm. Burying my nose in her shoulder, savoring her scent. Let's go home. I told her and everyone shifted. I took the dagger from the ground where Giselle's ashes lay with my teeth and ran with everyone back to the pack house. Clothes were scattered outside our house and everyone got dressed, except me because I needed new clothes. Everyone sat around the table quietly. Aaron rubbing his sleepy eyes in his jammies as he sat on Caitlin's lap and Iris snuggled against Mason. They were all looking at me expectantly and I raised my brow. Is there something you want to share with us? Dear Luna, Caitlin smiled brightly. I blushed and looked down at my bare feet. I looked at Mason to see a crooked smile on his lips. I'm pregnant, I said softly, looking straight at Mason. The crooked smile changed to a giant grin as he ran and swung me around, hollering excitedly. Everyone hollered and cheered. breaking open champagne and taking out grape juice and glasses. Mason looked into my eyes with adoration and I laughed happily. "Please, don't ever do something like that again," he whispered pleadingly. I nodded. "I won't go alone. I'll have you next time," I whispered. "You'd always have me." Is it over? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Truly over. No more demons or demon cousins or hybrids? I asked him. It's all over, baby. Demons were near extinct when this happened. They won't come for us ever again. I nodded and pressed my lips to his, giggling as everyone called for us to come celebrate. Chapter 25. My heart seemed like it was on the verge of beating right out of my chest. I tried to keep my hands from sweating. I just couldn't contain my nerves. This was getting married for an alpha and Luna. There were similar things, but a Luna and alpha are not to be married. They are to be mates. That is the way it has always been. Unless an alpha loses his Luna and remarries. Vice versa. So on and so forth. Iris came up next to me and smiled brightly. Aaron was already standing next to Mason. Happy as a clam, I'm sure. Nervous. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I whispered. Oh, please. You survived so much already. This is a piece of cake. Lucinda said with a chuckle as she slid my heel on. I laughed and folded my hands, sighing. Since I don't have my father or my mother or siblings to give consent to my being a Luna, I decided to walk alone down the aisle and give myself consent. That's all I would ever need anyway. Lucinda, Caitlin, and Iris all kissed my cheek and left to take their seats. Soft music began to play, cueing me. I sighed shakily and unfolded my hands so I could walk with poise. Everyone was looking at me when I emerged from around the corner and I took a deep breath. It was immediately knocked out of me when I looked up to see Mason in a fitted black tux, waiting for me. Everything else seemed to fade away around us, and it was just him and I. My legs seemed to move without hesitation as all I wanted to do was take his hands in mine. The bright moon shone down with a beautiful glow on his spectacular eyes. Everyone took a seat once my hands. There was no priest or anything like that. There was only one person standing next to both Mason and Iris stood by my side. And Aaron by his. I smiled brightly at him, waiting for him to start. London, I thank the moon goddess every day for giving me a wonderful mate. You have a wonderful heart and soul. You are the strongest person I have ever met. Not to mention the bravest. You would do anything for someone you love. I could not think of a better Luna to be by my side than you, he said, and tears brimmed my eyes. He took the ring from Aaron that had a crescent moon engraved into it and took my left hand. We have grown so much and my love continues to grow as well. I offer Mason, accept you as and pronounce you my Luna, he said before sliding the ring on my ring finger. I smiled wider if possible and cleared my throat, wiping a tear. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. We got off to an odd and rocky start. But it has been the best journey of my life and I wouldn't trade it for the world. You have a huge heart. You are kind and caring. You always think of your pack first and protect with everything you have. I would never question your loyalty to anyone. I truly know now that the moon goddess never makes mistakes. I love you more than you will ever know, I told him, doing my best not to choke up. I took the ring from Iris and smiled at the howling wolf engraved into the gold band. I, Luna London, accept you as and pronounce you my alpha, I said happily, before sliding the ring onto Mason's finger. We turned toward the moon together, our backs to the crowd. We shifted together and howled to the moon together. Applause erupted behind us, followed by all 750 pack members howling as well. I leaned my head on Mason's wolf shoulder and my tail wagged happily. I slicked Mason's cheek and he yipped happily. Aaron snuggled against my belly as I sat on my butt, listening to all the howls, and soon joined in again. I was a Luna now. No one had a chance of taking that away. I was about to be a mother. Everything was going to be all right. Don't let the story end. Subscribe to continue our Wolfpack legend.